How's it going there, Todd?
Good evening.
I was about to say, if you say good morning, it's not going to work.
It's not morning. It is dark
right
outside. It's great.
It is
I
straight
kind of
up
like
dark
this
right now. And this is a little bit getting to me mentally, but in a good way.
What have you been up to? What have you been up to is the question, the $1 million question.
Well, just really leaning into Halloween. My nanny has really gone all out, decorated every wall in the whole house, which is awesome if she will kindly take it down when it's over. But we're really in the spirit. We've got so many pumpkins. We're carving pumpkins on Thursday. I just ordered, my daughter has an amazing, it's a punk rock skeleton outfit, which fortunately for me comes in adult sizes. So I also have the same outfit. And Logan's an astronaut. So, it'll be an interesting...
the most adorable little astronaut. That will be perfect.
Yes. And then we'll just be punk rock skeletons that hang out with him on the side. So
Love that. Just
excited for that. So, but, I know my life is super intriguing right now. What has been happening with you?
Well, I turned 40. So that was big.
That's right.
I had a wonderful laser tag party. I know it because I'm 5 years old. But I'm telling you, you get a bunch of 40, late 30, early 40 somethings in laser tag, and they all become competitive children. And it is the best. It was the best time we had. It was so much fun. We played 2 amazing games. I felt like I was in a war zone. It was amazing.
Oh my gosh,
I'm so
jealous.
That wonderful party. And I'm just nothing that day was going to take me down. So I was just on cloud 9, loving life.
I talked to you that day on your way there, and you had the best wrist and headband situation going on.
Yeah, it was 80s themed. It was 1980s themed because I was born in the 80s.
Yeah, it was perfect. Yeah. It looked amazing, and I wish I could have been there.
Yeah, I was looking at stuff. My dear friend and roommate gave me a thing. Hang on, let me get it right here.
All right, so I'll take a moment.
Here, she gave me this thing that tells you everything that was going on the year you were born.
Cool.
Like it tells you the top films were Annie, hilarious.
Oh my gosh.
Star Trek, Poltergeist, E.T. And then like the cost of living, a U.S. post stamp was 20 cents. A gallon of gas was $1.30.
Oh, man, to be in 82 again.
1982, yeah. Minimum wage, well, this is crazy. Minimum wage was $3.35.
Still kind of is. Okay.
And the U.S. president was Ronald Reagan.
Okay.
So it's just this cool thing. Like it has all these things that was going on. Atari was very big, G.I. Joe, Smurfs.
Oh, yeah. This sounds very appropriate, especially for how you ended up.
Exactly.
G.I. Joe, Atari, and the Smurfs all combined made Todd. I love it.
Well, it's why I needed therapy. No, I'm kidding.
No.
Speaking of therapy.
Yes, speaking of therapy, we have an amazing guest on today. He has been on before in season 1 and back by popular demand, mostly ours. We decided to bring Lair back, who, if for all of our avid listeners, we've also interviewed his wife. And generally just it doesn't matter how many times we talk to this guy. He's just full of wisdom, thought-provoking amazingness.
Yes, 100%. And I think I should tell them a little bit about him. What do you think?
Yeah. For those of you who don't know who Lair is, we're going to give you a little background.
So Lair Torrent is a licensed marriage and family therapist, LMFT, treating clients from a holistic perspective, meeting them where they are and helping them to know themselves mentally, emotionally, physically, and spiritually. Lair sees clients individually, as couples, and as groups in his private practice in Charleston, South Carolina, or via Skype and FaceTime all over the world. In an effort to reach more people with his unique brand of mindfulness-based therapy, Lair also writes on the subjects that come up time and time again in his practice. He offers in-person workshops as well as downloadable versions of the same on subjects of couples healing, anger management, and much more. Lair has been sourced for his expertise by New York Magazine, Rolling Stone, and NPR, among others. He is the author of the book, The Power of Love. He is an avid surfer, spiritual journeyman, and devoted father and partner.
So, without further ado, Lair Torrent.
Hello, Lair. Welcome back to the program.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, good evening. How you doing? This is a rare evening podcast.
Yeah, but it has a good feel already. The energy between the three of us feels good.
Do you kind of wish I had set more candles and stuff out? But, in general, it is feeling good. I agree with you.
Yeah, maybe some fairy lights. I don't know.
Yes. Oh my gosh. That would look really good in your camper.
Wouldn't it?
That you're in, right?
What'd you call me? No, I'm kidding.
So we're going to talk about bullying.
So, Lair, we went over this in our last episode, but for those who haven't listened to that episode, which you should all go listen to it. It was a great episode. But can you please
the best.
It was great. Can you please explain what it is you do and what a holistic perspective is in therapy?
Sure. So I am by license a marriage and family therapist, which means you take a systemic look at any one particular client or couple that comes to the door, meaning sort of in shorthand, all roads lead back to mom and dad. Some of that's true. Sometimes it's not. So I have a sort of a dual track, right? So I look at things from that systemic marriage and family therapy perspective. I work with couples, I work with individuals, I work on our relationships. I say we have relationships with everyone and everything in our lives. If you think about it, we have relationship to all the nouns in our lives. And so I help people with that. I do it from a Western clinical perspective, but I also do it through what most aptly would probably be described as an Eastern perspective. And so what that allows me to do is to sort of step away from that sort of clinical, let's look at you through that therapeutic lens. And I can look at you through the, emotional, spiritual, that Buddhist psychology, Eastern philosophy perspective, which allows me to sort of take in the entirety of the client, mind, body, soul. What are your thoughts? What are your beliefs? What are your experiences? What's your wounding? All of that. So for me, it allows for a more holistic approach to include the entirety of the person.
That's amazing. I think that we obviously touched on it, didn't just touch it, touched on it in our last, on our last episode with you. And for those that listen to it, obviously thank you for listening, but also, you really did speak to you have a book. It's an amazing book. It's called The Practice of Love, but it incorporates everything you just talked about, kind of that there are kind of pinnacles of what we should focus on when we are in relationship with each other. And we touched on those 5 kind of guideposts to connection in our last episode, but we never really wrapped it up. We talked about mindfulness, the parts of us, the narrative, and which is 3 of the 5. And then the other 2 are choosing and personal responsibility. So I'm going to ask a big ask of you right now. Could you briefly kind of quickly sum up the first 3 for those that didn't listen to the other episode? And then let's kind of elaborate on the last 2, because I think they're really important and informative to the rest of our conversation.
All right, let me see if I can do it. So I believe that love should be a practice. Relationships and all of their incantations need to be a practice. If we want to do love relationships or relationships in general well, they should fall into the bin and category of shit we want to know how to do well, things we practice at with it. So we practice the fundamentals. If you want to learn a new language, you practice those fundamentals. You need to know what they are, but you practice those. If you want to do a great backside turn in surfing, as an example, or hit a great golf shot, you will tend to practice the things that you want to do well. Well, unfortunately, love and relationships in general have sort of fallen into the bin of things we should know how to do, like taxes and all of those things that we should just know how to do that when we come out of the gates, but we don't. And so I decided I was going to try and find some practices, some fundamentals that we could look at, that we could hone in on. The first one is mindfulness, as you said. Why? It's an Eastern perspective, but I don't believe that we can really change any habits, change the thing we're doing if we don't first push pause and take a look at what we're thinking and feeling on the inside. What we're thinking and feeling predicates our reactions. So we have to be mindful and aware of ourselves. And for me, it's the on-ramp to anything you want to do differently. You have to be self-aware. So mindfulness is practice 1. From that mindful perspective, with respect to love and relationships, I ask, who shows up in you? We are not the single organisms we see staring back at us in the mirror. We are the many vestiges of ourselves. The brain is compartmentalized. You are a very different person that shows up to work, that shows up to your partner, that shows up to your kids, that shows up to your family, that shows up to your friends. What we know from brain science and from all of the great therapists that come before us, that these parts, these aspects of self come to play, we should be mindful and aware of who in you shows up. Like, is your inner critic here? Is your inner defender part here? Is your wounded child here? So when people wonder why they can't communicate with their partner, they think it's, oh, it must be, I must use a communication device, I statements and all the imago techniques, all of that. Sure, those are great. But if you're in the wrong part of self, trying to have an evocative, emotional conversation, you are screwed. So like I say in the book, if you're in your Instagram account and you're trying to send an email, you can't do it because Instagram does not have that capability. You want to be in the right app. Same is true for the parts of us. If you want to have a loving, connective conversation with your partner, you need to be in the right app or the right part of your brain. That moves us over into, as you said, narrative practice 3. We tell stories. We are all the editors of our lives, right? The things that we think create the things that we feel. We need to be aware of those thoughts because those thoughts create feelings, create more thoughts, create more feelings that create our belief systems about who our partners are and who they are not. If we are not mindful and aware of the part of us that's telling these stories, we will create belief systems about our partners that are only sometimes true, that are often faulty, that aren't particularly compassionate, empathetic, or understanding. And narrative work is so important. It was something that they sort of highlighted in narrative therapy is that we prune our narratives, right? We prune the narrative. We select information that supports the prevailing narrative, and we deselect the information that does not support the prevailing narrative, which means, again, we are editors and we need to know what we are keeping and what we are throwing out. So that predicates so many things. And you find out in the book, it actually predicates good sex or bad sex. It predicates how connected I feel over a lifetime.
Okay, tell me this book again. No, I'm kidding.
Well, again, it is the practice of love.
The practice of love.
That's right.
Which Todd was supposed to read since last time.
All I heard was it could promote, great sex. So
look, so much of good sex actually happens in the brain. Familiarity kicks in. It's sort of like, yeah, I've been there. I've done that. That's a story. And we need to remember, we need to look at the stories we're telling about our partners because that's actually a human being. And I got dollars to donuts that says that if we allowed them to be the human being that they are and got really curious and looked at the story that we're concocting about them, we might actually find out that they are an ever evolving puzzle to be solved. And that gets fucking sexy.
Yeah. Like as much as you look at inward of at yourself and know how many different layers you have as a person and that nobody really, or even somebody's like, oh, nobody understands me. You can think there's so many, that's everybody. Everybody thinks that. So not that you're not special, not that we all aren't individually special, but if people looked more at the internal narrative they tell themselves and then thought about that's what everybody else is doing with themselves and that you are also coming up with your own narrative about that person. I mean, this is inception at this point.
Pretty much. And we find out that, I hate to boil it down to something so simple, but sometimes life can be a little bit of a choose your own adventure. And I'm not saying, look, you can't stand in front of a weed-filled garden and tell a story about there being no weeds. There are no weeds in my garden. There are no weeds in my garden. Expect to wake up and there are no weeds in your garden. There needs to be a partner on the other side that is actually doing things that would help you populate a good story about them. So it does take a back and forth. It's not just telling a good story, but we need to be aware of, are our stories fair? Are they empathetic? Are they compassionate? Are they true? And we need to run it through the filter that I offer in the book to make sure of these things, because our narratives can just rot the hull of our relational boat, as it were, if we're not careful, because we start to proliferate that narrative in the deep, dark recesses of our mind where we think it's no big deal. It's just a thought. We have about 40 to 60,000 thoughts on any given day. So I can have a bad one here or there about this person. But if we start practicing that shit, right, those thoughts become feelings, become our experiences. And so when we have a thought, the body does this fun thing. Now, it was Eckhart Tolle who said it best. He said, the brain tells a story that the body believes. And so we have a shitty thought about our partner that's unchecked. It's not fair. That, maybe we're tired. Maybe we're grousing at them for some reason. But if we do this consistently and the body fires off consistently in the negative direction, I mean, you can see how quickly we get to, I'm not particularly turned on by you anymore. I'm not particularly interested in you anymore. And that becomes really important as the dopamine blast of new love wanes, right? When that dopamine blast wanes, that's when people line up at my door. What's wrong with us? What happened? And they start proliferating that not so great narrative. And then you add things like, I don't know, children. You add stress in life, pandemics, job I don't like. We can begin with stress to also proliferate not great narratives that end up landing on our partner often. So we need to be really, really careful with this one.
And what is number 4 is choosing?
Choosing. Yeah. And so when I begin to explain it, people say, oh, you mean the 5 love languages? And I say, if you must, sure. Because it does sound a little like that at first blush, right? Like when I say, look, we need to know how to love each other. The 3 of us, each one of us in this particular conversation, we have different ways that we like to be loved, that we need to be loved. We like to be touched a particular way. We like, maybe some of us like physical affection. Maybe some of us like words of affirmation. And all of those categories that he came up with are important. I think they do. I mean, it spoke to some people. Obviously, the book sold. But I feel like that book fell a little short in the sense that our love languages, the things that make us feel connected to and loved, are actually directly attached to our core wounding. And if we're not really dialing into that for our partner, then we miss the boat. So we're just sort of obligatory, just doing things like, oh, you like words of affirmation. You look nice today. Sure. It becomes vastly different. And I outline this in the book when we realize that when we drill down below the surface of what makes us feel loved, it goes directly to 4 key questions, right? These are immutable questions that we are asking from the beginning of life. Am I loved? Am I safe? Am I enough? And do I matter? I'll say those again. Am I loved? Am I safe? Am I enough? And do I matter? When we come through the gates of life, we are actually asking those questions as little babies, right? We're asking those questions of our parents, of our families, of our extended families, and our communities at large as we move through the formative years of our lives. And if any 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 of those questions are not answered in the affirmative, we get a core wounding. And so we go through the rest of our lives trying to find that peace, trying to know that we are loved or that we are safe or that we are enough or that we matter. And it's as Harville Hendricks said, we are inexplicably drawn into the arms of a romantic partner who will recapitulate that childhood wounding, right? So we're drawn to the people who will push those buttons in us, right? The am I loved, the am I yes. Yeah, you feel that, right?
Okay, so just like Todd right now, I think is having an actual existential breakdown or maybe just a pure light bulb moment. But I think this is a big point because people always kind of say, well, you're kind of drawn to, if you had issues with your mom, you're going to try to find your mom. It's like, well, no, like for real though, you probably are.
For real though. And it's not quite that simple, but like, because mom didn't make me feel loved, those things that I call love languages actually make me feel loved. But I'll be drawn to someone who can't quite do it.
Yeah.
Over and over again until I find someone who can do this. They hold the duality of it. They push that button, but they can also hold space for the healing, because Hendricks finished that quote. He said, we're inexplicably drawn to the arms of a romantic partner who will recapitulate our childhood wounding, but for a very good reason, so that we might have a healing experience. And so we're actually looking for the person who can do both. Push the button a little bit so I can feel it, but also stay for the healing.
I don't know what to say right now.
I mean, honestly, I actually have never, I have never heard the end of that, like the second part. Like you always hear
people stop at that recapitulation.
They do. They just say you're drawn to, whatever to heal yourself from childhood. You never think of, like, I've always thought, well, then what's the point? What are we all doing here? Like now we're all just like reliving this over and over and over again.
For each other.
But the fact that there's a rhyme and a reason that person actually will fulfill both needs to give you what you missed, but also to help you work through that.
That's right. And not to heal you, not to fix you, not to become codependent and all that. So it's it's like a fine line, but we want to be able to stay in there. And this is why love is a practice. And this is the thing I teach in the book. It's to find that ability to hold space for your partner's deepest, darkest wounds. And in that, if you can do that, if you can weather those storms with them, walk shoulder to shoulder down that path with them, they will feel a sense of love and connection and support, the likes of which, and understanding, quite frankly, understanding is what Ellen DeGeneres said. She said that being loved is wonderful, but to feel understood is profound. That I don't think any truer words were ever said when it comes to romantic relationships, to feel understood by someone, to feel seen. And so when people are having a difficult time and their warrior parts of self are going at it and they can't communicate, I ask them to stop, push, pause, and I teach them to look on the other side of their partner's warrior self. And what do you notice standing behind there? It's a part of self that didn't know that they were enough. There's a part of self back there, a little wounded child part of them that never knew that they mattered to anybody. And it's in that moment that we find compassion.
But I have a question. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you can't expect your partner to also be your therapist.
No.
So can you sort of clarify that for me? Because what I'm hearing is that you need to hold space for their pain and see their pain and say, I'm here for you. And I guess just doing that is part of the healing, but you can't expect to actively.
No, not their job. They're not qualified. Yeah.
Right. So that's what I want to make very clear. Because when I first heard that, when you were first talking, I was like, oh, because then you made the correction when you said the part about codependency. You don't want to go down that road or anything.
No.
And so, yeah, I think that's a big point.
You do it through compassion and validation.
Yeah. Well, it honestly, Todd, it reminded me of one of our favorite quotes that I like to post on like our Instagram and stuff from Brene Brown, that it's like, what we don't need in the midst of struggle is shame for being human. Like in that when your partner is going through something, you're there to validate them and not to shame them and to be that safe space.
That's right.
But not the space, like not the only space that they get everything out or work things through, but that you should be the last place that they feel uncomfortable going to.
Right. I can be my broken self, but this is the problem. Most people stay above the surface and they argue over the symptomatic aspects, right? Like, I can't believe you said that to me at dinner last night, or I was so upset that you came home. Whatever the predicating problem is, when we drill down below the waterline on this, no matter what conversation, argument, fight we're having, most of the time I can find the woundedness in that's fueling the fight, right? You're not fighting over the time or where we had dinner or where we didn't have dinner. You're fighting over the fact that I never mattered in the world. You're fighting over the fact that I don't feel safe not knowing where you are, right? And when we start talking in terms like that, you don't have to be their therapist, but you do have to recognize and have compassion for the fact that this person from that systemic perspective is bringing shit forward. To pretend like it's, I actually had a couple on the line today, and she told me, she's like, I don't want to do that. I just want you to talk to us about which house we should buy. I was like, that's your realtor's job, not mine.
Yeah, I was going to say, why?
Yeah. I said, listen, I can sit here and listen to you about what house to buy all day long. And they were on opposing sides. And how do we communicate about that? I said, that's not what's going on here. I said, there's a little girl inside of you that has never felt like she's enough. And you feel like you're bringing all this to the big boss, who's the husband, right? And these two aspects, and he's never felt love. These are actually the aspects that are at the table on this conversation about a house. And she said, well, I don't want to do that. And I said, well, I'm sorry. I don't do this other thing. You should go find another therapist, because what's actually at play. And I said, we can put houses, we can put dinner, we can put the kids, we can put money, we can put sex in that same spot. We're still talking about the same two kids. And until you start talking about it, you're always going to have the same problems, and you're setting me up to fail. So I'm out. Yeah.
Boundaries on your part, just to be fair there.
I just know that I know where it goes.
Yeah.
And look, I can set them up to be an annuity for me. They'll be in therapy with me for a long time.
But we know that you're better than that, Lair. We know that you wouldn't do that.
It speaks to this last part. It's their own personal responsibility to sort of move towards that kind of emotional maturity. I mean,
That's right.
I remember in our last podcast, you said like oftentimes you're having to sit there and convince people that they have been through trauma. Like,
yeah, no, that's
so,
trauma.
Yeah, exactly. So if you could just speak a little bit to number 5, which is personal responsibility.
Sure. And so what I like to say is, everyone imagine a chalkboard where you see the first 4 written: mindfulness, parts of self, the narrative, and choosing. And I draw a big old line underneath those And underneath that line, I write personal responsibility. Now, when I first put this way of working together, I wanted mindfulness to be the common denominator practice. As it turns out, it's not. It's personal responsibility. Personal responsibility means a bunch of things, not the least of which is, in order for this to work, and in order for a relationship to work, I need to take responsibility for everything that I do and say, all the ways that I show up in a relationship. Now, how do you do that? Well, you take responsibility for how mindful you are, the part of you that shows up in the story that part's telling, and how are you choosing that partner? How are you choosing the most broken parts of them? And are you holding space? If you can do that, then you're cooking with gas in your relationship. Now, the second piece to personal responsibility is you have to be able to validate your partner's experience. You have to be able to own the fact that you make mistakes. You have to be able to say, I fucked up there. I spoke to you in a way that I shouldn't have. I did this thing that hurt your feelings. I might have made you feel unloved, like you weren't safe, like you didn't matter, like you weren't enough in that moment. And guess what? And this is why I have a job. Nobody wants to do it. It's like the jagged little pill that no one wants to take. And the convincing I have to do for people, and this is why I don't put personal responsibility at the front of the book because no one would read it, is I have to convince them that you are not giving up ground. Because people say, Larry, you're asking me to be too permissive. You're asking me to admit to things that I don't agree with. And I'm like, you have to agree they're actually having that feeling and they're having that experience. Now, you can disagree about your intentions, but some stuff you did and said made them feel that particular way. So we get past that part. And what they end up finding out is personal responsibility is not giving up ground. It's actually taking the higher ground in your relationship. It's taking the emotionally intelligent precipice. It's what Frost said, I came upon two roads in the wood one day and I took the road less traveled, and it's made all the difference. Personal responsibility in your relationship is that road. It's the harder road to travel, and no one wants to take it because in our culture, responsibility feels a lot like blame, feels a lot like shame, but the freedom on the other side of being able to own your stuff is unbelievable.
Yeah, I feel like not only is that something I think everybody in all their relationships, even friendships, like familial, kid, parent, anything should be recognize the personal responsibility you have when it comes to everything you do. And that it's almost like the ego gets in the way of any of that so many times. But the second that you do that, it's almost like a release. It makes you feel better. It makes them feel better. I wish that more people knew that the relief that can come from doing that, even though it feels really hard to get out.
In getting people on the other side of that, that's the tough sell. That's the one where sometimes I have to try to build in trust. And when I get there, I could say to them, just go with me on this. You're not going to believe it. And when they get there, they're like, I've had one client yelled up, when I had this other office, he yelled up the stairs, it's just easier this way. And he's right.
I don't doubt it, even though there's so many things that you can fight and then you do it and you're like, wow, I wish I had done that 10 years ago. How much easier would that be than me dealing with it now? Almost like childhood trauma. If I had just dealt with it earlier, it would be way less difficult to deal with it so much later. So kind of piggybacking off of this, you've mentioned before that you've had situations where and we talked about this in the last episode, that you've realized a couple isn't going to work out, whether that be because one isn't there to really show up or maybe both of them aren't really into doing the work. But how do you handle counseling a couple where you can kind of clearly recognize the relationship is either toxic or you or a client that's involved with it believes a personality disorder might be involved, such as narcissism, borderline personality disorder, antisocial personality disorder, et cetera, those kind of things. How do you navigate that?
Well, first of all, there's a couple of things that predicate any of the work that I do with people, and that is you have to want to. And wanting to means you're going to do the hard work of pointing the finger back at yourself and doing those 5 practices that I just talked about. Now, if someone's not willing to do that, there's no real relationship to be had. And so it goes a little bit deeper into, if there's no responsibility taken at large in a relationship, there's really no relationship to be had. I mean, you can stay together, but it's going to be bad. Now, if both people are just sort of in their defender parts and they're recapitulating childhood wounding, but no one really wants to take any real responsibility and hold space for the other's wounding, and they just keep doing the same thing over and over again, typically I'll say, hey guys, I'm about done. You can do this for free at home on your couch. You don't have to pay me to sit here and watch a Wimbledon match. I'm not going to do this with you. And very often, because I've built enough trust that they know, if Lair's tapping out, we need to get our shit together. And so they will often, and that's not like a technique I use, but it's like I get to a point where I'm not doing this, and neither should you. And if you have kids, you should care that you're doing it in front of them. Now, when we bring in to the equation major personality disorder of some kind, I'm very careful. I will often find a way, and look, I'm not in that habit of necessarily diagnosing, and I probably should say diagnosing and labeling. It's information. It does not equal the totality of the human, but it's information, and it's really good information. It's really important information. It might be not information that you want as their partner, but it's information that you need. And so I will, for various reasons, because the toxicity will seep to the surface. And I will say, for various reasons, I think that the couples therapy is contraindicated at this point. I think we all can see that it's not working. Wink, wink to the partner who is like, holy shit, this person seems crazy. And I will refer them out and say, you guys need to seek individual counseling. And typically that means that that person who is not dealing with the personality disorder either already has or will seek therapy or will come to me and say, what was going on there? What was my part? The other partner, typically when you're dealing with narcissism or borderline, as you pointed out, it's really hard to treat because they believe the narratives in their head about all of the things that they've concocted. Like that's the disorder, right? They buy into all the things they think. And so I'm fine. He or she's the one who was screwed up.
Right. And you said that they can't really see you.
No. And that's, again, this goes into the personal responsibility piece, because there are borderlines and narcissists who wake up to it and recognize this isn't working, has not worked, and will not work. And so they start doing their work and can take responsibility. And in that case, there is the possibility of relationship. But until responsibility is taken, as I said, just in the normal, boilerplate couple, if someone's not taking responsibility for the fact that they have a personality disorder, they can't see you. They can't actually see you. There's just really this idea of you and who they would like you to be. And you're not being that. So they get pissed.
Honestly, now it's like, I don't know why this took me so long to kind of put the brain cells together. But, we talked about this earlier before we were on air about the narrative. And we were talking about the personal responsibility aspect of this, but the narrative seems so important now that I think about it when you're dealing with somebody that really can't get out of their own head. I know that sounds so easy and simple, but to actually, if you put it that simply, that if somebody is kind of toxic, it's almost even most people, if they're in a bad place or they act out or they're hurting you, that's because of them and what's inside their head. But when it comes to a toxic individual who literally does not have the ability to think in any way that's even related to you, that's really mostly about them. And then they just paint you as good or bad. And in that one moment, there's no way to move forward with that. How are you going to, it's dealing with a 4-year-old. You can't get past that moment.
Well, right. And because of various aspects of both diagnoses, they won't believe you, even if it's a therapist. Often, you have to do it so carefully. And I wouldn't do it in the confines of couples, because then there's the humiliation factor and feeling like everyone's against me, because suspicion and paranoia is a big aspect of the borderline. And if you're offering it to a narcissist, well, you're going right up against this fallacy of who they think they are. And so it's a lose-lose. And so it's really hard to get them in treatment and get them diagnosed for all kinds of reasons.
Right. But so how would you counsel someone who is divorcing a narcissist or someone with a personality disorder, a borderline personality disorder? How would you start off to get a helmet?
and a cup and a mouthpiece and strap in because it's
maybe some boxing gloves.
I say that, and I'm being facetious, but I'm currently counseling a couple of people who are finding their way through that. And it's tough, man. It's tough because, now you've gone from all good to all bad in the case of the borderline. You've become the enemy in the case of the narcissist. And so they're going to come at you and they're going to use your words and gaslight. And the borderline has this narrative that they buy into. And it's often like, sometimes with some of them, you're like, that could not, yes, it was true. I was wearing a blue suit, but that's all that was true, you're almost like, how can this fallacy even be, this fairy tale even be a thing that they think is real? But they do. They buy right into it. And so it becomes really crazy making. And so the thing I tell people, get yourself a therapist. If you're divorcing, especially with the case of a borderline, it's like, get a good lawyer and be prepared, because they're going to make everything that you they're going to try and make it difficult. And so you might try like
mediation.
Thank you. Mitigation. You might say they're going to try mediation. And
they're not going to do that though.
Well, we can try, but they're going to blow that up. And typically until lawyers in the courts are involved, they're not really going to do anything you want them to do. And then maybe they'll do it, but it'll be difficult.
Yeah, that seems to kind of be a theme as we've done this podcast, is when you're dealing with kind of a toxic situation and people that have that kind of disordered thinking, there's a lot of promises. If we work together, we don't need any outside help. Like, let's not bring anybody else in. And it's kind of you hear, I guess the reason that I like to keep bringing awareness to this is because it's, I think, a subset of when you talk about abusive relationships, people always say, oh, well, there was abuse involved. And nobody ever talks about like why or where did that abuse come from? Why was that, what is that predicated on? And I think a lot of that is insecurity, alcohol, drugs, but all of that is also, there's a deeper root and reason for that as well. And so you're up against a lot. And so like to just kind of try to get into the mind of that person that you're dealing with, you have to kind of understand that they're working outside of the rules, like in their own head. They are not going by societal's, they know how to pretend. They know how to say, we can work amongst each other. We're going to make this.
Well, they're often very charismatic. And when, in the case of the borderline, they have a almost sixth sense about what you need and what you want and like your deeper desire. It's very strange. I know that sounds crazy, but that's true. Like they can sort of sense in you what you need and go right before that.
Yeah. It's kind of in a way though, like you said, they're charismatic. They can sense like that kind of the same terms for a con man. There's somebody that
we have to be careful not to paint them as all bad.
They're not. But
in the face of divorce, they can feel all bad.
But it's similar in that it's a smoke and mirrors kind of show. And it's unfortunate that it comes down to real life emotional feelings and damage.
Well, and that's what it is, right? Like there is, especially in the case of the borderline, often severe abandonment of some kind. And so really they're coming from a very, what we would describe from a clinical perspective, a very 2-year-old perspective. It's like, what's that book called? I Hate You, Don't Leave Me. And it's called that for a reason. And so while they are often, as you said, their actions and things they do and say are often toxic, they are coming from an incredibly wounded place. And so you need a therapist who has an incredible amount of compassion and an ability to handle this population. Just to give you folks a sense of it, the rule of thumb amongst therapists, as I understand it, has been, and this is what I was told by my supervisor, if you're not trained in DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy, which is essentially a form of mindfulness and a way to treat borderline as an example, you are allowed one borderline per practice because there are a lot and they will push boundaries. The therapy, if you're a good therapist, you will offer them exactly the thing that they need but don't want, and that's boundaries.
Which we're definitely getting to here very shortly. But I guess I think a kind of a burning question, since we've talked about this so much, is, and just as a whole on this podcast, is should people like this that have this kind of disordered thinking, do you think that they should really even be engaging dating or relationships as a whole? Is there a hope for recovery? Like, what are we?
Yeah.
We're all working around them. So,
sure. Well, I mean, look, until there's awareness and acceptance of the fact that this is happening for me and this is something that I'm struggling with, like if that person can have that awareness and take that perspective and take that personal responsibility for how they're wired, then sure, then there's absolutely a way. But the main problem is the lack of self-awareness, the buying into your own inner narrative and the belief that everybody else is wrong and I'm right.
But to me, that's sociopathic. That's what I'm saying. Like, I don't want to say narcissists are sociopaths, but like, there's a lot of characteristics in the stuff that I've read that some of it goes hand in hand with the manipulation and the calculated temperaments. And I've also, in my own experiences, when I have been with people that are narcissists, and I've noticed that there is a lot of push me, pull me. And I wonder, you did tell us once that you had one client that was able to recognize that they had borderline personality disorder and wanted to work through it. Could you tell us a little bit more about that? And is that person more of a rule of the exception?
In my experience and the people that I work with, it's an exception. You know, as I said to you, she came in, she sat down and she said, before we start, I need you to know that I've been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, in which I stopped. And I was like, my bias immediately kicked in. I was like, okay, oh no, strap in, where's my helmet, all the things. And she said, I need you to know that I believe it and I understand it. And I was like, okay. Because most of the time you might hear that and then they're going to tell you all the reasons why that was bullshit and that they're wrong and that I'm not that. This person didn't do that. She said to me, she goes, this is absolutely true. I've managed to screw up the majority of the relationships in my life. I'm currently being treated for it. I'm being medicated for it. I have another therapist as my DBT therapist, and I'm currently married, have a child, and I just want to make this work. And I know that so what we're dealing with is, in this particular couple, you would almost deal with it like you would chronic illness. We know it's going to flare up, but as long as we know it and as long as we're preparing ourselves for it, then we can deal with it. And it's not just the non-disordered partner who's dealing with it. That person's dealing with it too. Oh, it's happening again. And so we can deal with it that way. It's a part of our relationship, but does not define our relationship. And so the answer for me is yes, these folks can be in relationships, but we have to really be on top of it.
Is she a narcissist if she has awareness? Because typically narcissists are completely unaware. And if you tell them this is who you are, this is what these characteristics are, like, but they can't believe it. They're incapable of comprehending that. So is she actually a narcissist? Is she actually a borderline personality? You know what I mean?
Well, so you're saying, does the awareness take away the
label? Like if you're aware that you're a narcissist,
if a tree falls in the woods and nobody
hears a tree fall in the woods, does it make a noise? You know, it's like
does it make him a narcissist?
A lot of people say, yeah, the noise was making you just weren't there to hear it. In the case of the borderline, she was still abandoned. She still deals with the inner 4-year-old that does scream. She just doesn't scream as loud because she's been taught to notice her thoughts, to notice her feelings. And maybe she's going we worked from a parts perspective to go in and love that little girl that was left behind and to let her know that she didn't deserve that. And so, do they stop being borderline? It's a great question. I don't know. I don't know everything. That's for sure.
Well, I mean, I think it was a very introspective question, because if you really think about it, it's like, well, kind of one of the pieces of a lot of this disordered thinking in general is that they don't realize they're disordered. So it's almost like AI. If they start having awareness, are they now human? Like it's an interesting,
I mean.
Yeah. It's like, no. It's a very interesting perspective. And it's honestly, I do think it is more so the exception than the rule, but I think it's also, it'll give some people some hope, but I think that the majority should kind of understand that, self-awareness is not always going to happen.
Well, it's sort of like a recessive gene,
yeah.
There's a biological component apparently to the borderline, and many, perhaps can have that biological piece, but because of their circumstances and their environment, they didn't have perhaps an abandonment history that's not been activated within them. So are you borderline? I don't know.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So I guess if you were to be in a scenario like that, or even just in life with somebody that it seems to come up more with these kind of scenarios, toxic situations where somebody is maybe not so self-aware. You said that if you can't forgive, you should use intolerant compassion. So what is that exactly? Could you elaborate for us?
Sure. Intolerant compassion, it sounds like a oxymoron. Two things that just don't quite fit together. How do they fit together? Well, people come through my door all the time and they're asking to find forgiveness for a particular thing that's happened. And so I often don't know where that is. Like, I don't know where on your personal map forgiveness for this person may live. And so part of the problem of getting to forgiveness is there's some part of us that's like, I'm not letting go of that shit. That happened. If I let go of it, then we're going to forget. And I can't forget. And so what we want to do is we want to hold the duality of your experience, right? And that's more to the truth. And there's something about us and human beings. When we have our experience named either by someone else or ourselves, we get a little bit closer to healing, okay? The simple practice of naming, it's an age-old Buddhist practice, but being able to say, this happened, or I'm having this experience. It's like we can be pissed off and raging, but when we say to ourselves, man, I'm really angry right now, we immediately shave off a bunch of points, right, on the anger meter. So naming becomes really important. And that's an aspect of this, of intolerant compassion. And so what this says is, I'm entirely intolerant to how you treated me, the things you did, the things you said, whatever that might be. And at the same time, I'm incredibly compassionate to the fact that you were a human being. You were in a tough situation. You were flawed. You're learning. And so in this, we can hold the duality of that experience. This is really good with like parents who have messed us up. So you have parents who are, my mom was 15 when she had me. And so intolerant compassion for so many of the things that went down in my childhood would be like, I'm intolerant to the choices that were made, the things that we did, the things we didn't do, or whatever it might be. But I'm also compassionate to the fact that you were a kid having a kid, and I can hold space for that. And so that lets me take a breath into that. And that gets me a little bit closer to understanding, and understanding gets me a little closer to forgiveness. Doesn't mean you have to have a relationship with them.
Yeah.
True. Yeah. That's very true.
Leads us very.
Let's talk about, we said earlier we were going to talk, let's talk about boundaries. Can you explain importance of boundaries and what they are and how they can help people in their day-to-day interactions?
Well, boundaries say this is where I stop and this is where you stop. This is as far as I'm willing to go. It delineates that line that keeps us safe. It can make sure that we're practicing self-love, self-compassion. We're not giving too much of our inner stores, as it were. And, people have a really hard time with drawing boundaries. There's a lot of folks out there that feel a lot of shame drawing boundaries. They feel a lot of guilt, because of perhaps some of the things that maybe the way they were parented, they weren't allowed to say no. And so boundaries are tough across the board. I'm speaking incredibly generally because boundaries tend to be very, very specific. And it's like we talked about earlier, Brene Brown said the most compassionate people tend to be the most boundaried people in the world. Because if I'm not drawing a boundary with someone that I need to, or in a particular area of my life where I need to, what comes up? Like I might say yes to that thing. I might do that thing, give that thing, but I'm going to resent you for it.
Super powerful. I think it's just it goes to the basically being intolerant compassion, that whole concept of, I see you, I know what you want, but it's not something that I can personally deal with. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like, I just think it's almost like it feels like a novel concept at this point. Like, I mean, I've been preaching it and working in therapy with it for 5 years, but it's still not something that I feel like is like out there to the public that you're allowed to say, no. Okay. You're great.
Right. But people don't like when you do that. Some people don't like boundaries. They think that it's, how dare you set a boundary? How dare you tell me how I can speak to you?
What's wrong with that person?
Yeah. But I feel like I've learned that when you set a boundary, somebody's reaction to it can almost be more informative than anything you would have known before that. That response in and of itself validates why you set that boundary to begin with, because people will kick and scream, and either they learn from it and they don't do it again, or they think it's absurd and they continue to kick and scream. And then that's when you know, okay, that was a necessary boundary.
Not my person, not my people, right? Your friend's going to go. The person who loves and cares about you goes, okay, I get it. I wish you were going to be there. I wish you would have done that thing or whatever. But your friend, your people are going to go, okay, I get it. That's your boundary and I'm going to respect it.
Yeah.
That's a version of love in my book.
I mean, you both are parents. Maybe y'all can speak to this, but is it easier to set boundaries with your children versus like with an adult family member?
Huh. That's a really good question, Todd. I'd say
he's full of them tonight. By the way.
I know. My God. He's like really enlightened. This must be the afternoon, Todd. Personally, I find it much easier to set a boundary with my child because I also think of it, and I should maybe think of it more the way that I do with my child, with people, is that I'm trying to make a better human. I want to help this human. This to you. I need to set this boundary because I don't need you to
tell you that, so I'm not raising a little asshole.
I don't want an asshole. I don't want you to go out into the world. That's
the responsibility we have.
Yeah, I think in a way is a beautiful way to put it when you're setting a boundary for even a grown-up friend. I mean, it's like
I'm not raising assholes.
I don't want to be friends with an asshole. Come on, let's get it together. But it does come more naturally, I feel like. With your child, because for one, they're much smaller than you and you can take them, but mostly that you feel a responsibility and you feel like it's going to do some good, that they're learning a lesson, and you feel guilty as an adult trying to parent another adult, but you're not really doing that. You're just setting the parameters for your own relationship. That's just my opinion.
One of the things that when you're setting boundaries with other adults, friends, family members, and they really don't like them. And this, with healing, in my experience, both personally and professionally, with healing comes more boundaries, right? And so you're leveling up and you're creating more boundaries and you're saying no where you would have before said yes. You're not doing the things or showing up to the places that you would have normally. People are going to have feelings about that because you're changing the rules. Okay. Everyone was playing Monopoly. You kick the board over and put the Scrabble board down. They're like, what the fuck's going on? What do you mean? And so the people in my practice, they'll say, I'm setting all kinds of boundaries and I feel great about me, but I'm kind of standing here by myself by and large. And that's one of the pieces of healing that is not on the front of anyone's pamphlet, which is with healing. Often there's a boneyard of people who can't handle your boundaries. And so you start losing people. But the fun part of healing is, right? The fun part of healing is I might be alone, but I'm not lonely in my boundaries.
Well, and those people are dropping like flies, but what's also dropping is the toxicity that was making you go to therapy, Right.
Yeah.
That's
but you're healing the wounded. You're healing the wounded child in you that needed to be around all these people or sort of feel connected in some fashion.
Right.
Or like you were a part of something. And all of a sudden you're like, as you heal, you're like, I actually don't want to be a part of that group.
Yeah. You kind of learn that you look around and you're like, oh man, I picked, like people say, my parents never really said this, so I just always refer to movies, but like, oh, they're hanging out with the wrong crowd. It's like, you're literally hanging out with the wrong crowd. And you suddenly realize, okay, well, I don't want people to treat me badly. I don't want people to walk all over like, when I say no, I don't want people to, essentially make me feel guilty about this. And then everybody is gone. And that means that every single person that you were surrounded by was not in any way a good person to be around.
Like emotional pariahs.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Goodbye.
I'm sure that they also have their unresolved trauma that they need to work through as well. Because it seems like people magnetize to each other. The wounded seem to magnetize to each other.
That's right. And as you heal and as you set boundaries, you will sort of push yourself out of those places and those spaces with those people.
Yeah. Well, okay. I'm going to ask you a question, and it is in no way a reflection of what we just talked about, just as a caveat.
Okay.
But we had the amazing experience of interviewing your wife, Ashley, who is just basically an angel on earth. So
Ashley Torrent is the moment. She is the beat. She is everything that everyone should strive to be on this earth. And I am
Todd
a
is
huge
starting
fan now.
a fan club as we speak. We'll have a link
Literally.
to sign up for it. But no, seriously, love her. Thank you for your connection to her. We love both of you.
She's
we love
special.
everything about y'all. But we've obviously, when we talk to her and we follow you and everything, you know, we've learned that via that you've had your own kind of trauma that you've just recently been working through. And she also has her own. So, you know, if you kind of briefly, I mean,
sure.
whatever, actually talk as much as you want about it, but what you're kind of working through and how you guys both deal with that trauma together. With both having
I
it.
touch on it somewhat in the book, as most of the book is anecdotal and stories from my practice and from my life. And so she's in there for sure. But I probably could have written we probably still could write an entire book on how you as a person deal with, you know, systemic, pervasive childhood trauma or trauma from a former relationship that finds its way into your new relationship. You could write a whole book on that. And so the first part of our relationship was really predicated on this awakening that happened in her, having had a severely borderline mother, and how, you know, it sort of showed up, interestingly enough, you know, once she was in a relationship with me, and the confines of this relationship made her feel safe enough, I think, that she could, in concert with the school we were going to, do that work. And so we were in this school called the Helix Training Program. I liken it to having gone to Hogwarts. And essentially it says, you can't work your own shit. You're not going to be able to help anybody else work their shit. You can't ask a client to walk a path you're unwilling to walk yourself. And so in that school, she was having these awakenings. And so how we handled it in our relationship is I began to understand that this was almost like a chronically ill person, as I said earlier in the podcast, and that love is inconvenient. And I don't always understand it, but it's my job to try and understand it. Loving her means that I don't roll my eyes and go, this again, or I thought we were over this. Or as I said at one point, and I put this in the story in the book, I said to her, you're almost a therapist, use your tools. And we still joke about that faux pas.
Yeah, I'm sure that went very well.
Not well. Did not go well at all. But we laugh now because I was trying to fix it. And when I dropped my toolbox and just was present for, validated, and loved her through it, and showed her that because the person who was supposed to be the most loving person in the world was the most unsafe person in the world, it's my job to be safe enough, not to fix her, but to be a safe enough haven in this otherwise sordid world. And so that's what I've done. The majority of our relationship is to be present, to be safe. Sometimes I've been her big, hairy bodyguard to make sure that the world doesn't hurt her. That's sometimes my job. Now, in that process of Helix, one of my instructors that I shared with you guys earlier noticed that I had this sort of hero complex with my mother, that she sort of saved us, and she did. You know, she was a heroine by and large, but there was a lot of mistakes. And that teacher sort of sniffed it out, and she started kind of asking probing questions. And I looked at her and I said, back the fuck up, leave it alone. I wasn't ready. And I was doing all my other work, but I refused to really look at that, because in order to look at that trauma, I would have had to look at our situation and her and possibly dismantled this vision I had of this person in my life. And that's fucking hard. That's really hard. And I would also have to deal with the fact that I have what was most aptly described as pre-verbal trauma. Now, pre-verbal trauma happens in utero often, or before you can really speak. It's things that happen so the body keeps the score, as Dr. Vanderklook in that book, beautiful book, says the body keeps the score. It's a book on trauma. If you haven't read it, you know, it's a solid one to get. And so, you know, here I am in her womb. She's carrying me around for 9 months, a 14-year-old kid. Any of you have, I have a 13-year-old boy. He can barely find his feet. So, you know, the idea that this young child was going to be a parent in 9 months. Can you imagine the level of stress hormones that are coursing through her blood, that are coursing through mine?
My God, no. Yeah. There's no way for it not to.
No way for it not to. And then add on top of it severe poverty, and really never really knowing if it was ever going to end. There was no light at the end of that tunnel. They kicked her out of school, for Christ's sakes, because that's what they did with girls back then. And so there we were. And so I'm feeling all of this as a child. And they put me in foster care for 4 months and gave me back to her. So there's that fun piece. And so my trauma lives in this sort of ever-present anxiety that for the life of me, I couldn't explain. I just knew it was there. And so it came out in all kinds of fun ways. And, I tried to, throughout my life, drink it away, fuck it away, whatever I could do it away. I was trying not to feel how I actually felt, which was scared, fear, as if it had wrapped itself around my skeleton. That's pre-verbal trauma. And so now my work is in trying to ferret that out and to understand it and to, as my wife so aptly puts it, have a relationship with it. Because for me, and I don't know that this is clinically true, that shit ain't going away anytime soon. It shows itself.
Well, you said earlier, the trappings of trauma make it difficult to give the benefit of the doubt. It probably showed up a lot with Ashley, moving through your marriage. I can imagine that even with her, we talked about her experience or with her family, and she said that you were so patient and you loved her through all of that stuff, and she did not know love like yours existed.
Yeah, that one got me.
That's what she said.
But I think it seems that you were extremely there for her, provided for her. And probably some of that did come from kind of your respect and admiration for your own mother and for women because of what you'd been through and how you don't want to acknowledge that your mom was in any kind of that she had done any wrong. Don't make me go there. But at certain points, I'm sure that it was kind of hard to, I don't know, just accept some faults maybe in women in general.
Sure. Yeah. Have boundaries and hold them accountable and not do because some level you're just trying to make it all better. That's what I did, So as a teenager, I would do anything she asked. It didn't matter. She always described me as, you're such a good kid. You're just such a good kid. So I would, at 16, I was driving my grandmother to the hairdresser and on the way there picking up groceries and buying tampons and didn't care. I hope my friends saw me because I was doing it for my mom and all the things. I was a good boy, cleaning the house, doing the laundry. And so to your point, was some of that in there? Of course it was. But that's maybe the best aspects of how trauma might play out, right? Like that's a boon I got. And so there is that recapitulation of her childhood wounding as a person that she loved. I could leave her at any point or be shitty. But I was holding space and doing those things that had never been done for before. And I was showing her that the world could be a safer place. And it was really her, less than me, that had a hard time with benefit of the doubt always. I have a hard time with benefit of the doubt in the world around me, that the next meal is assured, that the lights are going to be on, that that person doesn't have sort of nefarious, I have to, if I'm honest, it's people in the world can feel a little rough to me. And so that's how my trauma plays out. I have a hard time with benefit of the doubt there, although I do my best to watch it and keep, and make sure that I don't build those narratives about people that aren't fair.
I was just to say the narrative. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I was going to ask, I was kind of what is the most effective thing that has been to help you work through that? As far as therapizing yourself, if you will.
It's been mindfulness, paying attention to my thoughts and feelings, which is looking at that narrative, noticing the part of me that's up and to be able to name those parts of me and been problematic in that area and taking responsibility for that. And, moreover, what I've come to understand is that having a connection to spirit for me, not necessarily God or anything like that, that word's hard for me, but energy, universe, spirit, having a connection to some idea that there perhaps is something larger out there. That's been incredibly helpful. And what we're finding is in the latest brain science is that's really helping with trauma. But that's the thing that's kind of moving the needle for folks, is to having some understanding or belief in something bigger.
I think that is a very resounding and wonderful thing for everybody to kind of hear. Because I think the main problem, and from my own kind of random research of this as well, is that, a lot of it comes from loneliness. Mm-hmm. Addiction can come from loneliness or disconnection.
Boredom.
Yeah. Well, but like there's just a general disconnection from other human beings, but it can also, it seemingly is a disconnection from everything in life. So feeling as if
yourself, because
including
all those
yourself.
External pursuits that this world asks of us, we often abandon ourselves.
Yeah. And so it's like if you can connect even to it doesn't have to be God, but just like the earth, the universe,
For
any
me,
of
it's
it.
the ocean when I'm surfing.
Yeah, the ocean.
Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah, you're a surfer. Like exactly, just having something that makes you feel less alone and more connected. In some ways, that's what we're trying to do here by putting these random words out into the ether is to show people that they're not alone. Because the more that you feel like you are not the odd man out, like that you aren't the weird one, that you aren't the only one that's went through that, is going through that, will go through that. I mean, whether, especially with like anxiety, you can imagine all kinds of horror stories. So the more that you can feel connected, the less likely you are to drift into depression, anxiety, substance abuse. I mean, that's the hope.
Yeah. And what I've sort of taken from this whole podcast today is like, you really have to take an active approach to your own growth. You cannot sit back and just expect.
Yeah, it's not going to happen to you.
Or even just your therapist to do it for you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You have to be actively engaged to becoming a better human. And everybody, please read The Practice of Love. I'm literally downloading the audiobook when I get off of this podcast because there's been so many mic drop moments.
Finally, I know this guy right here. I mean,
I don't read, y'all.
To be fair, he does not read. So this is not like
reading, man.
It's not personal. It's global for him. But
I have some directors. I'll show up to a show and I haven't cracked open the script.
Dude,
my gosh!
Honestly, I've had a hard time like finishing books in the last couple of years. It's only very recently that I've like kind of dialed back in. I know once that happens, it's hard to get back on track.
It is. Yeah. If you kind of get off, it is really hard to get back into the swing of things. And especially if you get kind of addicted to podcasts and like audiobooks.
Well, that's the thing. People love the audiobooks.
Yeah.
And the podcasts now.
Well, as we talked about earlier, the Audible version of the book is also out. And we also know that Lair had to try out for his own speaking part in his book, which is my favorite fact of this day. I had an
audition to play myself.
It's great. You know?
It's the best.
Whatever works. I'm glad you got the part.
I thought it was a pretty good me.
How many people were you up against?
I don't know. It was 4 recorded books, which is like, it's funny, my kids knew I was writing a book and all of that, but it wasn't until I told them that I was going to do my audiobook on recorded books for Audible that they were like, recorded books, all of our books are, this is amazing. This is unbelievable. Like Diary of the Wimpy Kid, like they have a big
now you're famous to them.
Yeah. They're like, man, now you're really there. And so I don't know who I went up against.
Oh, man. Oh, my gosh. They didn't tell you for your own book?
I know the casting director. I could probably call him and ask him.
Yeah, we're going to find this out. I want to know who is like up for it.
We have a tradition on this show where we have a little bit of a palate cleanser and we have a question of the day.
You might remember.
Oh, boy.
Yes. And so our question of the day today is, what is your biggest irrational fear?
Emphasis on irrational.
Oh, my God. Well, I guess it depends on where I am.
Oh, okay. All right. I'm ready for this.
So if I'm in the water, it's a shark attack.
Here.
Yeah.
Well, actually, that's not it.
I don't know if that's irrational. That's like a genuine concern, isn't it?
So, no, it's look, I have my Lucky Pork chop around my neck when I go in, so it should be good. You're hanging your legs in the water. You don't know what's in there. And like, there are sharks here. It's kind of sharky.
It's sharky here. It's true.
And so the other day, as Ashley and I are out in the water, she says, Lair, shark. And I was like, sure. No, come on. And I look, and there is a fin coming at her. And she goes, it's a black tip. And those are often known to be not awesome. And I go, so I'm sitting there and I have to ask myself from the book, I'm mindful of what part of me is showing up here right now. What part of me is going to show up
going through every step.
Right. And this is all going on in my head in a nanosecond. Because look, what I know is this. I don't have to outswim a shark. I just have to outswim her.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
And so in that moment, I'm like, okay, well, that's the dick part of you. You can't be that guy. I can't be the first one to shore. That's not going to be a thing. Right. And so I say to her, swim towards me, swim towards me. And she swims, she's paddling towards me. And I go to the beach, go to the beach. And I paddle past her and I paddle at that thing.
Oh, man. You went the whole opposite way.
I went right at it. I'm
okay.
like, you son of a bitch. This is the mother of my children.
Yeah. I'm going to punch you in the face.
So pull up and I sit up on my board and all of a sudden it stops and then it flits away. So I paddle back to the beach and she's standing there and she's like, what the fuck are we going to do? And I said, honestly, the big plan was I was going to punch it in the fucking face. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
And then I looked at her and I was like, I got to ask you, how many guys in your life have fought off a man-eating shark for you?
Yeah, right?
What does that do to you?
Even if they didn't get to punch him.
Best answer to question of the day ever.
I know. My
best
gosh.
answer.
I immediately gave the irrational fear and then had the irrational fear realized and then surmounted it.
Wow. This is a real therapeutic full circle moment that we just went through.
Yeah.
So is it now cured?
Oh, no, I'm still scared.
I hope he will still swim at them and try to punch them in the face.
I'm convinced it's out there and has a vendetta.
Oh yeah. No, it's probably got its friends
He's
now.
coming at me like Orca.
He told everybody else. So now they're all coming back. They're like, oh, that guy, he was totally going to punch me in the face. I could feel it.
He's crazy. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, we can't thank you enough, Lair, for coming on the program. You've been such a rock star. And we honestly both, I mean, there were some many mic drop moments. And I'm going to tell literally everyone to listen to this episode because, I think anyone can take at least one or two things from this episode and it's pretty transformative. So we really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. It's easily my favorite is to come on and talk with you guys. You're so much fun. As I said, as our pre-conversation, we probably should have just taped that.
I know.
But this is fun too.
I know. We'll just start doing that. We'll just have convos over Zoom and record them. The bonus
in
episodes.
the middle of the day. Make it a surprise. Just like pop in.
Yes, I love this. And then we'll throw random weird questions at you about sharks.
Lair, what's the narrative you're telling to yourself today? Just call you.
What's the narrative of today?
Yeah,
All right. Well, you have been awesome. Thank you so much. You're definitely going to be back because this is our new thing. Anytime. But have a wonderful evening and we will talk to you soon.
Take care.
All right.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
God, he's good.
I know. I'm just such a fan,
What'd you think?
I mean, I thought all around, again, he gave us a different way of looking at everything, also validated all my feelings, and in general, summed it up with an amazing shark story. So I don't know what more we can ask for at this point.
Exactly. And, I really am going to go download that book, his book, The Practice of Love,
which
everybody should go buy it right now.
And I have listened to it as well as even highlighted parts of the actual book because a lot of our quotes come from some of the ones that he's put in his book.
Yeah.
But it is a really, really good book. It really just lays it out there. Like, there's no excuses. There's no reason to argue with it. It all makes sense. It works for regular relationships, friendships, bad relationships, all of it.
One thing I really, really appreciated about today was him saying the importance of boundaries and what they are in our lives and how they can be healthy. And even if you get to the point where you've set boundaries with everybody and you're the only one standing there, then maybe you'll start to be in the body of your most authentic self.
Yeah. And I think something that we didn't really get a chance to dive into, but like once you start doing that, other people will follow suit as well. Because it's almost like people think that they can't do that. And then when they see other people doing it, like, oh, that's allowed? Mm-hmm. Like I'm allowed to say that I don't want that? And I don't want
People also don't want to change who you are in their story.
Yeah.
So if you're the person who always takes their crap or doesn't speak up when you know what, I really don't want you speaking to me like that. You always do.
Yeah.
You always let me. What do you mean? Why all of a sudden are you like this? Why all of a sudden, for them, it's very sudden that these boundaries are coming up. But for you, it's like, it's been building.
Yeah. No, I really wanted to say this for quite some time, but I just didn't really have the opportunity. No, I think 1,000%.
And the other thing, the personal responsibility part. Like that speaks to me so, and the narrative, oh my God, the things we tell the story we tell ourselves and how that is so important in a relationship. You know, when you look at your person and you can either say, you know, you can either tell the narrative of the good things about them and the happy things that you're doing with them instead of, oh God, he didn't take out the trash again. What?
Yeah. I mean, it's like always the same thing where people always give you advice about, well, you know, just think happy thoughts. Like genuinely, if you focus on the good or the bad, that is where it's going to eventually lead. So it doesn't have to be every single thought, but
what we focus on grows.
Yeah. If there's anything I've really learned throughout this whole process is that, you know, one, boundaries are amazing, but two, that the things that you put the most thoughts and just effort towards are the things that will continue to grow, and that's good or bad.
100%. 100%. You put stock in the negative will grow.
Oh, yeah.
And him talking about specifically narcissists in general, the fact that he said that they can't really see you and it's sometimes like negotiating with a terrorist, it could not be more on the money, I think. And for anyone who out there who is either married to a narcissist or dating a narcissist, or you suspect that someone has a borderline personality disorder.
Or just toxic. You know, if it's just like
toxic, we can label it all we want.
Yeah, like you said.
We can diagnose people all we want. But if the signs are there that they're just not a good person for you, just get out. Life is too short.
Oh my gosh, so true.
That's one thing that this new generation is all about. You know, they are pushing the envelope with that. I don't have to stay in this relationship. I don't have to stay married to this person if they're toxic
or even get into a relationship. You know,
exactly.
Like don't even have to. My worth is not based on another human being, and I think that should really be the mantra. That's my new mantra. My worth is not based on another human being. I think I honestly have spent too much of my life basing my own self-worth on what other people think. And 100%. I feel like this.
Well, you know, those people are beneath your dignity.
Mm-hmm. Well, and even if they're not, it still shouldn't dictate who I am as a person.
100%.
Like, even if there's a bunch of people groveling at my feet, that doesn't mean that they're good people. Like, you know, even if somebody's like, you're the most amazing person that's ever happened, like that doesn't tell me who I am as a person. Just that a bunch of other people think I'm amazing. And it goes both ways. So it's standing in your worth and recognizing that, you know, first of all, it's not all about you. And that's what the problem we're dealing with anyways with people with disordered thinking or narcissism or whatever, is that it is all about them and their minds. And that's where the narrative comes from. But that in your own narrative, you know, it's not that it's not all about you, but it's that you have a positive impact on your own self-worth. So put yourself as close to first as you do everybody else.
Well, and the thing that, remember when Lair at the beginning of the podcast started talking about, you know, the questions, the 4 questions that we asked just from infancy, which were, you know, am I loved? Am I safe? Am I enough? And do I matter? And that kind of got me choked up in the beginning. I was very moved by that because it's so true. That's the core of everyone's human experience. That's what we think.
It is. And I think the most beautiful messages I've ever been sent have been things that are like, just remember you are loved. And now I'm realizing why those struck such a chord. But no, I think that everything, once again, Lair, Torrent, just bringing the truth bombs. And if anything, just striking up a conversation about all of this and how important it is to, like you said in the interview, put effort in. If you want to you have to do the work. You can't just rely on a therapist to do the work for you. You can't rely on...
Got to play an active role. Got to.
Yeah.
Because no one's going to do it for you.
Yeah.
No one can do it for you. People are incapable of fixing you or healing you. You have to take part in healing yourself.
It's like everything else in life. It's like we can't expect everybody's going to do what we want them to do.
Exactly.
It's the same way. You can't expect that you're going to... some magic fairy godmother is going to come, but maybe she will. I don't know.
Let's definitely check out the book. I mean, I know you've read it. I'm gonna go actually read it.
Go check it out from the library.
Yeah.
But we still have to answer the question of the day.
Oh, yeah. So, Laura, I'll ask you first. What is your biggest irrational fear?
I don't know if this is irrational because I'm very convinced that it's a thing that is unnatural. So snakes as a species should not exist. There is no reason for them to be able to literally, if you look at a slow motion of them moving on the ground, they are kind of dancing their way about. They have no feet. Why do we trust them? I don't understand this. And even if you tell me that they are, this one's non-poisonous, non-venomous, look for the shapes of their head. No, they're all wrong. Every part of them is wrong.
Agreed.
I can't with them. But I will say my other one is that if I put my feet down, like off the side of the bed or like out of my car without like knowing, it's definitely irrational. Fear that somebody's going to come and slice the back of my Achilles heel.
The Achilles. Oh, God.
Yeah. And it's
ouch.
It's constant. I can't get it out of my head. So now, great. Tonight, can't touch the floor getting in or out of bed. So now that I've done that journey, what is your biggest irrational fear?
It's so funny that you said snakes because that's why I was putting my head in my hand when you said it, because
I thought you were just like, you're ridiculous.
My biggest irrational fear, I'm saying this on air, I have to look 2 or 3 times in the toilet before I take a poopy because I'm afraid a snake is going to crawl out through
Todd,
under the
this is not irrational. Did you see the movie The Craft?
Yes.
That's where that came from.
Maybe that's where that came from.
There's a freaking snake
Damn
that
you,
comes
Feruza
out
Bulk.
of the toilet. And you're like, wow, as if snakes couldn't be bad enough.
But that's literally, I think one's going to come up and like, I don't know, bite my asshole off or something. I don't know, you know?
Or just weasel its way in there.
Weasel its way, you know, it's just, you know, yeah, I can't. I'm just scared I'm going to die from an ass biting, you know? Like
oh
a snake
my gosh,
ass biting.
I'll say that's a little more irrational than just general fear, but still.
But there's not a snake in the drain. There's not a snake in the pipe.
But you know what? If they can get anywhere.
Laura, I swear to God, you're going to make it worse.
If they can dance along the soil,
oh my God.
Think about what water could do.
Oh my God.
Okay,
God.
Everybody out there that is also afraid of snakes, it's not going to happen. You're fine.
You're
they
fine.
live outside.
You're fine.
Everything's fine.
We're on a trauma podcast and we're just causing more trauma by talking about irrational fears. Great. Sorry, everyone.
Yeah, you're welcome for that question of the day. But this, to be fair, this was a wonderful podcast because it was a mixture of deep and fun and laughter and just self-reflection of how ridiculous we are sometimes as people.
Exactly. And Lair cried. He shed a tear.
He did. Oh my gosh.
So
I kind of feel a little bit empowered.
Because we got him to cry.
Managed to get him to cry. But no.
The code.
No, I think that shows true love. And that's why we love them so much. And they will be back. We're going to have them back on together, I think.
That would be great to have them both on at the same time. I think that's the next
see them
move.
Interact. They should have a reality show. Let's talk about this later.
All right. Sounds good.
All right.
Okay.
I love you. I'll see you next week.
Love you too.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.